Welcome back, everyone, to our final panel at the Cannabis Society's North American MSO Growth and Consolidation Conference. This will be about how single state operators and regional players fit with a multi-state operator or an MSO. And today, this panel will be moderated by John. So I'm going to hand it over to John for further introductions. So John, take it from here.
All right. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So I'm counsel in the New York office of Zuber Lawler, where I assist our cannabis clients with intellectual property matters, corporate setup. The firm has 15 years of experience. I'm also spearheading our efforts as finally the East Coast moves towards legalization, slowly but surely now with New York, New Jersey. And I am going to be the host of the forthcoming Cannabis Last Week podcast, a hybrid of news and analysis extracted from 420 sources each week, aka the weekend update of weed, which is why I get this fancy microphone. So before I start and introduce our very, very illustrious panel, I just want to do my typical moderating prayer to the video chat deities. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy. May Amazon Prime elsewhere for the next 30 minutes. And may our dogs and kids be quiet. All right, so with that, I think we're ready to start. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful, wonderful panelists alphabetically, order of last name. So first off, I want to introduce George Allen. He's the founder of Geronimo Capital, and he's also chairman of the board at Lowell Farms, Inc. Previously, George was president of Acreage Holdings. He joined Acreage's predecessor company in 2017 and grew it from a 5-employee investment vehicle into the vertically integrated company we know now with centralized operations via multiple financing rounds, a complex roll-up, dozens of acquisitions, executive recruiting, and an IPO. Prior to that, George Allen was CIO of Cambridge Information Group, where he managed a portfolio of private and public direct and indirect investments. In 2011-2014, George led an acquisition-driven restructuring of Blucora into a leading provider of wealth management and tax software. And prior to that, he spent 9 years at Warburg Pincus managing investments. And prior to that, he was at Goldman Sachs in New York and Hong Kong. Moving on, I'd like to introduce Jamie Mendola, head of strategy at Air Wellness. He is also a board member of the Glass House Group. Jamie has nearly 20 years of experience as a public and private equity investor, and has been an active investor in the cannabis industry. Prior to joining his current company, he was the founder and portfolio manager of Pacific Grove Capital, a hedge fund focused primarily on investments in consumer, cannabis, technology, and payments. Pacific Grove was named the best new hedge fund by Hedge Funds Review in 2015, and Jamie received accolades from an institutional investor as a hedge fund rising star. And last but certainly not least, we have Shannon Vetto, CEO. Shannon, I pronounced that correct? Yes, excellent. CEO of Evergreen Market. Sorry for not verifying earlier. So Evergreen Market is a multi-state retailer headquartered in Washington and now expanding into California. She began working in the cannabis industry after 25 plus years of working in the global financial markets, and then moved over coinciding with the recreational legalization in Washington. Shannon trained as a CPA with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and she worked around the world as a market entry strategist in finance. Now, within the cannabis industry, she's worked directly for the private equity firm Privateer and spearheading their global expansion of Tilray into the Asian region, as well as helping develop a software company, Shield Compliance, that allows banks and credit unions the ability to bank cannabis compliantly. Shannon is an advocate for legalization of cannabis and the empowerment of women, with membership on the retail committee for the National Cannabis Industry Association, and a member of Women Empowered in Cannabis. Thank you all for taking the time to join. It is a pleasure. And so I wanted to get into a couple of questions that we discussed. So Shannon, right? You are, I guess, to a certain extent, an SSO branching into other states now at California. So via the licensing process. So how are you approaching that expansion process with what you've learned in Washington?
Well, I think what we've learned in Washington is something about, there's a lot more years under our belt here than some of the other states. And I think the thing that, in all honesty, you approach a state, you think with your skill from the other state, it's completely transferable. And I think what you find is you got to really analyze each state's business model, and the regulations really changed that. And California, we went in and we found a jurisdiction where we would likely prevail because they were looking for experience and capital, not necessarily local only, and therefore we were able to actually win a license. And through the process, luckily COVID hit and we learned a lot more during COVID around what vertical integration means, what delivery means, which Washington State does not have either. And you really had to adjust your business model in order to handle that in your scale, and sort of operating and economics change relative to that. So I think the short, I guess I should say longer answer to what we learned in Washington is we all sell cannabis, and we also we all grow it and we all process it, and we have very similar product form factors and types, but the business model is different, and state by state is equivalent. I worked globally of country to country. The product may have relevance to the same consumer, but the business model needs to be different, and you need to really understand that.
Great. We're going to circle back to everyone with kind of some follow-up questions, but just to kind of get the different perspectives, I'm going to move over to George now. So obviously Lowell Farms is very, very entrenched in California, but you do own a number of brands. So I'm curious to know how you're kind of using the licensing of these brands to expand into other state markets.
Well, the licensing opportunity for us has been huge, and it's kind of just opened up in the last year or two, where there's been a consumer demand for brands that are known on the shelves, and we saw a huge opportunity to license into other markets. And so we've looked for the right partners, folks who can take our brand into a market and make it powerful and make it work. I think the brand has to have an amount of escape velocity to be able to get out of the home market and to find an audience elsewhere. And I think that escape velocity is a combination of sort of being a known factor in other markets. Maybe it's an Instagram following, maybe it's a fair amount of consumer awareness, but it also is just the raw power of a brand to talk to consumers through the glass wall of a dispensary case. And when you get a product like that works in California or works in a competitive marketplace, there's certain ephemeral aspects to that brand that translate into other markets. And that's certainly what we found in the launch when we brought the product to Illinois and Massachusetts, and we're in evaluation mode now of a handful of new markets with a bunch of different partners who are looking to work with us.
Great, thank you. And let's transition over to the MSO representative on the panel, really. So Jamie, coming from another angle, from the MSO angle on this, how has AIR grown through acquisitions of, single state operators? And what are you targeting as you go forward in terms of partners like that?
Sure. So our business, I would say, is sort of the second mover amongst the MSOs. We started the platform in 2018 in 2 states, Nevada and Massachusetts. We really got our sea legs under us and really strengthened our operations team before scaling the business. And cumulatively, since 2018, we've done about 15 acquisitions that have now put us in 8 states, where we have a vertical operation in just about all of those markets. And so we've really had a stated goal of being the highest quality producer of cannabis flower at scale. That doesn't mean there won't be a great niche, premium brand in California, but we really think that the quality starts with what's in the box, and the ability to deliver a suite of products in both our own stores as well as the wholesale markets are best served by operating and controlling the vertical integration in those respective markets. We have also started to really focus on brands, both in terms of our internal, house brands, if you will, and also through acquisitions, including a recent acquisition of Levia, which is the leading beverage company in Massachusetts. And so because we have such an established footprint, I think we'll see opportunities where we buy a brand that's, say, strong in one market, And we then have the infrastructure where we can roll that brand across our own footprint in 8 or 9 markets over time. So, broadly speaking, as we look at acquisitions, I would say there's a couple of criteria that we really look at. The first, which may not be completely obvious, we really focus on the human capital side of the business. Ultimately, this has been an industry that's been capital starved, for the last 5 years. It's clearly been opening up over the last year or two. And notwithstanding the recent price action in the public markets, generally most of the larger companies have reasonably decent access to capital at this point. And so where we've really differentiated ourselves is really trying to find the great operators and the great human capital that we can bring capital, scale, maybe a broader product portfolio, and where we can bring more talent to our team in a market that's effectively talent starved.
Great, thanks. So I think actually, George, I want to circle back to some of the things that you were saying, right? So now, the brand licensing has been very successful. So you talked about consumer awareness. So how do you evaluate which market, whether you talk about Instagram likes, how do you evaluate which brand goes to which market based on this type of consumer awareness? Is it, geographically something might be easier from California to nearby states, but you also have stuff in Illinois. So what plays into that decision-making process?
Yeah, I would say we kind of turn the coin over a little bit and figure out each of the markets that are out there that are recreational focused. We ask ourselves the question of what would it take to be successful in that market, right? And then can we put that together? And if we don't think we can put it together, or the options on the table are inadequate, then we sort of mothball it and move on to another market. Because I think from our standpoint, one of the things that's really critical for us is not to have, not to have any false starts, not to give the consumer a bad experience, not to blemish the brand, but to really protect the institution of the brand. Once you give consumers a bad experience with a brand, you're working overtime to try to recover it. So from my standpoint, it's really about looking for a partner that's going to be able to represent that brand and put the brand best foot forward in terms of fantastic quality feedstock into the product, but also just the same passion and vigilance for quality in terms of the presented product and how they sell that product onto the dispensaries. And so from my standpoint, it's all about looking for the right combination of partner and market dynamics. And if we can figure out, one in every single recreational market, then we'll be there. I think from my standpoint, this is a really powerful moment in cannabis branding, right? If you think about what's going to happen in all cannabis brandings, we're at the precipice of the moment in time when mainstream CPG, mainstream brands can start to participate in cannabis, as well as things like Instagram and Facebook, and all those advertising platforms are going to open up to cannabis once we see some relaxation on the federal level. That's going to be a far more competitive environment and expensive environment to get the ear of the consumer. So my standpoint right now, our view is, I want to get in front of the cannabis consumer everywhere they are across this country with great product in our back pocket, if it's possible to do it, because later on, to build that brand equity with the consumer is going to be a lot more challenging. It's going to get more noisy out there. So we're focused on that kind of rollout right now. We think it's much easier to go asset light into these other markets to rest upon the infrastructure that our partners have, and until further notice, that's the plan of record.
Agree. And certainly, I think one piece of news that I was monitoring that was good in what you were saying in terms of some of these big tech companies, the Apple App Store, right, opening up to cannabis apps finally. Now we just need Google Play to follow suit. Thanks, George.
Or just every cannabis consumer out there just to switch over to iPhone. It's fine too.
That works.
Sends the right message.
And hey, look, we got I think just today or whatever recently, Amazon doubled down in terms of backing Schumer's bill. So another step in the right direction. You got the Koch brothers and libertarians hopping on board. So there's movement. So thank you, George. Now, Shannon, I want to kind of bounce back to you with a question that occurred to me when you were speaking. So you said that you were able to identify and look to expand to locales where being local didn't matter as much, right? Where it really was the quality and experience. So, how do you identify those areas Because, resources are resources, and, what are the partnerships that you still kind of need to make as you move forward with some of these license applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on we thought we could do multiple states at the same time. We have 3 owners of the company, 3 original owners, and that's it. And we have no cap tables, so we're capital constrained, at least to the extent that we're profitable. Luckily, we're one of the largest in Washington, but the max you can own is 5 stores. So we looked for retail applications across the board, and the application process is long and it's not necessarily guaranteed, and so you have to make the decision: do you build it or buy it, kind of, and I think we're still learning, but what we have learned is, at our size, we can really manage one store or one state, and then we need to create scale in that state quickly and partnerships, especially given that we are not vertically integrated in our state. And I don't think it's time to generate core competence in a second category along the supply chain at this point. We need to create good partnerships there, and I think California is a great place for us. And there's a good starting point in that we won an application down there, and it's in a area, we're in the Central Valley, that has a lot of opportunity to grow, and there's some smaller players down there that would be willing to work with us, I think, and we can develop. But I think the real question we're grappling with is the pace, given all that you just talked about in terms of federal legalization, and which will start to address interstate commerce. And, what does that mean, as well as, Amazon's double backing the bill? Are we going to get e-commerce? And my opinion is we're going to see step change, not incremental change, and we're going to have to respond quickly, and that usually requires a lot of money, a lot more than companies my size can provide. And so the question is, how fast do we need to grow to stay relevant? And how do our brand is really well known in Washington, and we're one of the biggest because you can only have 5 stores, and so there's very few 5-store owners here. But the pond is going to get bigger, and the game is going to be played, I think, globally more so than just even nationally. And those are the things that, as an organization, we're trying to answer the capital question more so than just what state is relevant. I think all of us know we have some core competencies that will scale in other regions. The real question is, how fast is scale required? A mid-sized company either's got to become tiny or it's got to get large one way or another, and we're kind of in that space.
Got it. Understood. Continuing my ping pong approach to moderating, I'm going to bounce on over to Jamie right now. So Jamie, we want to ask now, so after you've acquired, an SSO, what is the process of integrating to, how do you achieve symbiosis? And, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the process and how you amplify each other?
Sure. Look, I think the integration piece is probably even more important than the acquisition itself. We've certainly seen a bunch of companies, both in the cannabis industry, never mind other fragmented industries, where the roll-up looks good on paper, but it never actually achieves the desired results of 1 + 1 = 3 or 4. And so some of the things that we do is particularly on accounting, finance, compliance, HR. We have the pieces in place, during the pre-closing process, where we're effectively ready to onboard all of those key functions immediately, so that we have the technology, the dashboards, the data, and the financial structure ready to go. And in terms of branding and marketing, some of those things we are taking our time, because the reality is some of those brands are very well respected in the individual states, particularly at the retail level, or in some cases on the wholesale side. And while certainly we will harmonize our retail and wholesale footprint over time, we don't want to disrupt the apple cart too fast and bite off more than we can chew all at once. So I think you'll see some news from us towards the end of this year in terms of right-sizing our wholesale and retail banners to drive a little bit more scale and consistency. But I think we'll take a real market by market approach in terms of how we kind of go to market on the commercial side and make sure that we kind of have everything buttoned up on the mid and back office.
Understood. Just looking to see if we had any questions come in. If there's anyone in the audience who wants to submit questions, feel free to do so now. So I just wanted to ask also, Jamie, I had one other follow-up question. I mean,
Sure.
What problems have you seen arise from, kind of poorly executed M&A deals? And, what happens, in those types of circumstances?
Sure. Well, look, I think if you look back probably 3 or 4 years ago, when some of the MSOs were just starting to come public and the investor base was, I think, a little less mature, the market was clearly being more highly valued on a footprint basis. And so I think you saw a bunch of operators chasing number of states or breadth of footprint. And as we all know, this is a very difficult business to operate. It's very difficult to do in 5 or 10 states. It's even harder to do at 15 or 20 states. And when you have a dispensary in North Dakota or a 10,000 square foot grow in some other state, you really just don't have the time, attention, and human resources to manage those. And the prize, even if you get that right, is so small, it's hardly worth it. And so we've really, I think it's probably a little bit more of a common strategy these days, but we've really focused on going deep rather than wide. We have guidance out there for about $800 million of revenue for next year, and we'll have north of $100 million of revenue in 6 markets. So we have a pretty diversified, business, and I think that's sort of our bogey as we enter in new markets. I'm sure we won't get there in every single one, but really driving, scale so that we have strong market share, so that we have the resources to devote to those markets. And we think that ultimately is what the winning strategy is, at least for MSOs.
Got it. So I think we touched upon, obviously, the biggest, shoe to drop at any point is federal legalization. We have made some progress in the terms of, bills being introduced, though it seems like, unfortunately, defeat might be snatched from the jaws of victory by overreaching a little bit. So my question is mostly directed towards Shannon and George. What do you guys each think the timeline is for federal legalization, and where do you want your expanding companies to be by that point?
Go ahead, Shannon.
Okay. I am very opinionated on this. I actually think safe banking will precede any form of legalization, which by definition will open our capital markets in the US and reduce our cost of capital relative to the global markets. And we'll see an influx of capital, as well as a reversion of all the IPOs from Canada into the US. That, in my opinion, is a condition which starts to normalize the industry as a true financial industry that is going to be one that's going to consolidate under CPG. I think our supply chain will break up. It's not going to be all integrated. Have to do everything soup to nuts. And the place I want to be is we are really good at what we do in this state. And the reason why this state remains a little far behind is because we have ownership requirements that are difficult to get around, although not impossible for anyone other than Washington State residents. So it's also a very mature market, and there is good human capital here with a lot of experience. And I want to be in a place where we can continue the brand that is a quality brand, and we position a little more at a premium end with high education. And I think that's got a real long-term play. And I think we need to be there by safe banking, and then the rest will take a while, because I think the interest groups will start to broaden beyond, cannabis. We'll see tobacco. We've already seen alcohol. We're going to see a lot of players, and they're going to fight about where we reschedule.
It's going to be interesting, right? Because, certainly safe banking would have made sense as an incremental step. But then you have, senators like Cory Booker saying that's not happening, right? Unless there's social equity at the same time. So it's, I don't envy Chuck Schumer, the juggling act. George, I think we're getting close, but you want to weigh in as well?
Look, I think it's anybody's guess on the timing. It really is anybody's guess is the timing. I will try to say I think safe banking's got a decent shot. And one thing that I think is really fascinating is if you looked at the draft that Schumer put together and the way there was an exemption there for interstate commerce, if you couple that with Amazon's interest and their support of the Schumer bill, in my opinion, I think we are headed for some step function changes here, and it's really why we've carved out the piece of real estate that we've carved out here, because I do think ultimately some either via the front door or the back door, there's going to be a fair amount of product moving across this country as decriminalization sort of looms large. And from my standpoint, I want to build a brand with his little commitments to hard infrastructure in places that we know are not the long-term solution for growing cannabis and producing product, but in terms of making sure our brand is there. So right now we're planning on sort of that future. It's the whole reason why I went to California and the whole reason why we've been building the business around the brand that we've been building. And I think, time is generally our friend. As soon as decriminalization and sort of normalization occurs, I think we're all faced with much larger advertising budgets here than we currently have. So from my standpoint, I want to build as fast as I can in the eyes of the consumer before it gets a heck of a lot more expensive to grab mind share.
Great. Jason, I see you have reappeared.
Yes. I'm just here to close us off. So by all means, John, if...
I just want to thank you so much, panelists, for taking the time. And I hope that, thank you to the Cannabis Society for hosting. I think I say that on behalf of all the panelists, and just thank you to everyone who attended. We hope that this was informative.
Thanks, John.
Great.
Thank you.
I will echo that. Thank you, John, for moderating, and all the panelists for joining. So that takes us to the end of our schedule for today. But the platform will still be open if anybody still wants to check out the data room with a few company decks there, and as well as sit in the lounge and connect with any attendees that might still be on the platform. I encourage you to do that. Have a look around, see which companies are set up, and make some new contacts. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next Cannabis Society conference. And until next time, I wish you all a good afternoon or a good day wherever you are. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.